You don't have what it takes to run a business, little brother. That's how my sister ended a 15-year chapter of my life. 10 words, a brittle smile, and a manila folder thick with HR euphemisms. My name is Evan Rourke, and until 11 days ago, I was the operational backbone of Lantern Quay Hotels, our family's boutique chain along the Mid-Atlantic and New England coast. At 42, I wasn't chasing a corner office or my face on trade magazines. I liked boilers that purred instead of coughed, guest surveys that read, slept like a stone, linen vendors who answered their phones on Sundays, and staff who smiled for real because schedules were fair and pay hit on time. Across the desk, my sister Tessa stood with her arms crossed, a marble statue in a blazer the color of storm glass. She had been the company's president for exactly 11 days, ever since our father slid into a chairmanship that sounded honorary and felt like surrender. The board agrees we need fresh perspectives, she said, as if the board weren't her, our father, and 2 classmates she'd converted into directors last week. We've engaged a consultant from a major brand to take over your responsibilities. You'll receive 6 months severance. HR has the paperwork. I set my framed photos in a cardboard box, the glass cold against my fingers. The last one I gently packed away was a black-white shot of our grandfather standing under the hand-painted sign of our first inn on a windy street in New Bedford. Tessa had never hung that photo in her office. It didn't match the palette. Nothing to say? She prodded, manicured nail tapping the desk. I let a smile cut sideways. Good luck with Harbor West, I said. The mask cracked. For one heartbeat, nerves flickered in her eyes. Harbor West, our largest property, was mid-renovation, behind schedule, over budget, and balanced on a scaffolding of promises I'd made to contractors who trusted my handshake. She recovered with a swipe of gloss. We'll manage just fine. Our consultant has turned around properties twice that size. I nodded, lifted my box, and walked out through the glass doors into air that smelled like rain and toner. 15 years of work dismissed in 15 minutes. What Tessa didn't know or had forgotten was that 5 years earlier our father had said something that rewired the way I looked at our business. Don't stack everything you own on one floor, Dad had told me over clam chowder at a diner older than both of us. Hotels can be luck and weather. Land is gravity. I'd listened, quietly, while my sister collected titles, TEDx slots, and brand collabs. I spent evenings learning the grim poetry of zoning, ground leases, and tax lots. I followed deeds through city clerk's files like a detective follows tire tracks in mud. I learned which families in which towns owned which corners, and which of those families were ready to sell. I drove out of our Boston office that afternoon with a cardboard box and a calm I didn't have to pretend. Patience, Dad liked to say, is just planning with good posture. 3 months from that day, our preferential ground leases under 3 of Lantern Quay's flagship hotels would come up for renewal. And I owned the land. I grew up between rooms. While Tessa shadowed Dad at investor lunches and conference stages, I shadowed the maintenance crew through backstairs that smelled like hot dust and lemon cleaner. At 16, I could sweep, talk a rooftop unit back into service, or shave a towel contract by 8% without making the supplier feel skinned. Dad never praised with trumpets. He used balance sheets and the occasional hand on the shoulder. Your sister sees the billboard, he'd say, not unkindly. You see the blueprint. It worked until it didn't. As Dad's hair went more silver than salt, Tessa's world sharpened into decks and buzzwords. She relished consultants who used verbs like disrupt and reimagine, who promised scale and brand lift, and who treated humans like friction to be sanded down. Her vision became a slideshow of national expansion, celebrity partnerships, and curated lifestyle content that played well on panels. Somewhere in there we stopped talking about water pressure. 5 years ago, when Dad first floated stepping back, I ran our books with a mechanic's ear and heard a knock. Our 3 most profitable properties, Granite Wharf, Portsmouth, Beacon Harbor, Providence, and Harbor West, Portland, sat on leased dirt. Those leases, inked decades ago with owners now retired to the next world, were approaching their preferential renewals. If a third party bought the dirt and cranked the rent, we'd be paying through the nose for the privilege of sleeping in our own bed. It's a vulnerability, I told Dad in a booth at Rosie's. His favorite place where the coffee is burnt on purpose and the blueberry pancakes are a religion. I know, he said, fingertips steepled. But cash is pinned to the Providence build. We're asset light for another year. I can buy them, I said. Personally. Hold under a new company. Lease back to Lantern Quay at current rates for 5 years. He studied me over his glasses. Eyes the same steel color as the ocean in February. That's a heavy bite, Ev. I've been saving. I believe in what we built. We spent 3 months with bankers, attorneys, and surveyors who could find a rod in a snowstorm. When the dust settled, Rourke Land and Title owned the ground under Granite Wharf, Beacon Harbor, and Harbor West. Lantern Quay stayed tenant under a 5-year preferential lease written so plainly a seagull could understand it. Renewal in 5 years. Same terms if both parties agreed. Market if not. Does your sister know? Dad asked when the ink dried. It's in the minutes, I said. But Tessa doesn't read anything without a gradient. He laughed, then didn't. The morning after I was fired, my body woke at 5:30 out of habit. No night audit pings. No text about a gray water backup or a linen truck stuck an hour out. I made coffee and watched tankers ghost across Boston Harbor, steady as planets. Efficiency doesn't clap, it just moves. My phone buzzed. Luis, head of maintenance at Harbor West, heard. Their loss. Consultant is changing specs midstream and shaving line items I begged for. You didn't hear it from me, but it's already creaking. Not my shop anymore, I typed. My thumb hovered. I erased the second sentence I wanted to add, document everything, and hit send. A second ping. Dad, breakfast at Rosie's. 8 o'clock. He was in the corner booth when I walked in, stirring coffee he'd never sweeten. He looked older, not in the face but around the edges, like paper left in sun. She told me after, he said without hello. You didn't stop it, I said, not a question. His sigh was a tired thing. She thinks Lantern Quay needs to evolve. Less family shop, more platform. And you agree? I think the board, he swallowed, finds her plan persuasive. The waitress set pancakes I hadn't ordered and eggs I always did. Dad cut his stack neatly like decisions. The land, he said finally. She doesn't fully grasp the renewals. It's all in the files, I said. She doesn't read the fine print. I know. He set down his fork. What are you going to do when the clock hits 3 months? Market renewals, I said. No discounts, no favors. That will hurt. It will, I said, and neither of us pretended otherwise. He put his hand on my shoulder as we stood to leave. Your sister thinks business is a game. You always treated it like a foundation. Don't forget which one you're standing on. I watched him walk away under a sky that couldn't decide whether to rain. 2 weeks of quiet. Then Tessa called and let it ring to voicemail so she could control the air. We need to discuss the transition. Some files are missing. Call me back. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just the assumption that I was still orbiting her son. The next afternoon, she appeared at my apartment without invitation and stepped inside as if the door's swing were deference owed. You're ignoring me, she said, sitting on my couch like a queen claims a throne. I'm respecting the separation you insisted on. What files are missing? She demanded. Vendor contracts, maintenance schedules, a complete renovation package for Harbor West, she recited, and lease abstracts. Our consultant needs context. Everything sits on the shared drive, organized by property department year. Same as always, I said. Context requires clicking. She exhaled, patience like a frayed thread. We'll have legal send a formal request. Do what you need. She stood, smoothed an imaginary wrinkle. You'll regret this posture. Posture changes with weight, I said. Be careful what you stand on. A certified letter followed, corporate counsel demanding all documents relating to company operations. My attorney, Priya Nandakumar, replied with an index of what existed on Lantern Quay servers and a polite boundary around my personal notes and work product, the half-scribbled margins, back-of-envelope calculations, and field fixes that lived in my head and sometimes my desk drawer. The law is unromantic, but she's fair when you don't ask her to be anything else. The calls started. Front desk leads, housekeeping supervisors, kitchen managers who'd bled for Q4 margins. The efficiency program had cut hours and corners, then asked loyalty to make up the gap. Linens ran thin. Guest comments sharpened. Morale dropped like barometer before a nor'easter. Satisfaction wasn't the thing I felt. It was closer to grief. These were my people, and my sister's vision had turned them into line items with pulse. Then the email that confirmed what Tessa hadn't read. Our property insurer flagged ownership updates across 3 locations. When a policyholder claims they own the dirt and their file says otherwise, underwriters get twitchy. The CC line included risk, legal, and operations. I forwarded it to Priya with 2 words. Told you. Dad called 20 minutes later. She didn't know, he said, small. She didn't want to. She's called an emergency board meeting. Claims you hid critical information from the company. Nothing's hidden. The company has paid rent to RLT Holdings for 5 years. RLT? Dad frowned aloud. Rourke Land and Title? Tessa signs those approvals every quarter. He was silent long enough for the coffee in my hand to go cold. Come tomorrow, he said. Please. I don't work there. Family, he said. Family fired me. When we hung up, I sat at my desk and turned Granddad's key between my fingers until the old brass warmed. Priya called an hour later. Lantern Quay Council wants terms. Send the renewals, I said. Market. Clean. And if they balk? They will. Harbor West rises 8 stories over Ocean Avenue. Glass set to catch the morning like a habit. I parked across from the porte-cochere and watched guests wheel luggage through revolving doors that had seen weddings and hurricanes. A text pinged from Priya. Lease packet delivered. A silver coupe slid into the reserved slot. Tessa climbed out, phone to her ear, the new consultant trailing like a shadow with a tablet. They disappeared inside with a kind of urgency people mistake for competence. I called Luis. Emergency inspection, he said without hello. They're pawing through blueprints like answers live between staples. Between us, I think they're trying to find a way to challenge your deed. After we hung up, I drove to the county clerk's office where deeds sleep until lawyers wake them. Priya had the big stuff. I wanted the small. I asked for microfiche because clerks treat you kinder if you speak their dialect. Everything on Harbor West, Beacon Harbor, Granite Wharf pulled up clean, transfers, surveys, leases. On a whim, I widened the map 1 county over. A permit application blinked back. T.H. Atelier Hospitality LLC, Oceanfront Parcel, Hotel Development. Applicant, Teresa H. Whitaker, Tessa's married name. I kept searching. Another. New Bedford Waterfront. Another. Just outside Providence. 2 exits from Beacon Harbor. All filed the past 3 years. All near our strongest markets. All under the same LLC with the same agent. I stared at the screen until the words went from lines to a shape I didn't want. Tessa hadn't fired me because she thought I couldn't run operations. She'd fired me because I could, and because I was in the path of what she was building in secret. A competing brand meant to cannibalize the very markets we'd nurtured. Priya, I said into my phone, voice steady by force. Pull everything on T.H. Atelier Hospitality. Corporate filings, permits, investor decks if you can sniff them. On it, she said, and when Priya says that, the oxygen changes. 2 days later, she slid a binder across my kitchen table. Inside, a business plan full of adjectives and theft. Leverage hard-won expertise and clientele developed at Lantern Quay. Target traveler segments currently loyal to LQH. Exploit cost inefficiencies created by legacy leadership. There were maps with dots where our dots sat. There were renderings that looked suspiciously like Harbor West with a different font. I have the investor list too, Priya said, tapping a page. 3 of her independent directors. My phone rang that morning from a number I recognized and hadn't expected. Vincent Ross, one of those independent directors and Tessa's old classmate. I've seen the lease renewals, he said. And I'm hearing about Atelier. Not rumors, I said. Documents. He exhaled into the receiver. There's a board session at 2. Danielle Tessa intends to propose selling Harbor West, Beacon Harbor, Granite Wharf. Says the new ground rent makes them unprofitable. Of course. Devalue the assets. Force a sale. Acquire them on the cheap through her LLC's investor syndicate. Keep the buildings. Dunk the brother. Put your name on the awnings. Thank you, I said. I didn't tell you anything, he replied, and hung up like a man who just remembered integrity. I booked a train to New York. Northbridge Hospitality occupies a floor in Midtown that smells like polished walnut and quiet money. Its CEO, Julian Vale, had tried to poach me twice over the years. Loyalty kept me home both times. Loyalty has a long fuse. Sometimes it leads you out of a burning house. Interesting timing, Julian said as I set a folder on his desk. I hear Lantern Quay is shuffling the deck. 3 cards in particular, I said. Buildings I know like my hands, on land I own. His eyebrows rose. You own the dirt. Rourke land and title does. And the president is your sister. He whistled softly. Family businesses, he said. Tone equal parts affection and triage. Show me. While he read, I watched the park through glass. I thought about 15 years of roofs and boilers and 3 a.m. phone calls. I thought about how the best view I'd ever had was over a loading dock, and how I loved that view because that's where trucks turned up and promises became linens. These fit our northeastern expansion, Julian said finally, tapping the pro forma. Why not just spike her rent and rake in cash? Because she's building a competitor, I said. And because your acquisition keeps my people employed, not purged. He looked at me for a long time. Terms. You acquire the buildings at a premium the board can't refuse. Northbridge signs 20-year ground leases on fair market terms. You commit to carrying over every line-level employee, honoring tenure and pay, and you keep the soul of each property. I consult on operations during the transition, then step back into dirt and deeds. He smiled. You're not trying to win a crown, are you? I'm trying to make sure the lights stay on. 2 days later, Northbridge Council began turning my folder into paper with teeth. Priya quarterbacked quietly from my side of the scrimmage. While the legal mail flew, I called Luis and 2 GMs I trusted more than most relatives. Told them to steady their crews and keep their receipts. A boutique industry blog sniffed the smoke before the fire reached the eaves. Rumors of distress at Lantern Quay, Northbridge Eyes Prime Waterfront. Tessa blasted a company-wide denial that read like a promise and felt like a dare. Dad called that night, voice blurred with fatigue. The board won't sell, he said. They didn't vote. They stared at each other and Tessa stormed out. She'll try again, I said. She says you're undermining the company. What am I trying to accomplish? He asked suddenly. He rarely asked questions when he thought he knew the answer. I let the silence stretch until meaning found the words. I'm protecting what I built, I said. Like you taught me. 3 weeks later, Lantern Quay's quarter landed with a thud, ADR down, RevPAR down, guest satisfaction limping. The stock dipped, recovered, wobbled. Priya forwarded a formally worded invitation from the board, minus Tessa, asking me to present strategic alternatives for the 3 properties. I walked back into the conference room I'd walked out of with a box. Tessa sat at the head of the table, blade-straight spine, jaw set. Dad sat to her right, looking at the agenda without seeing it. The rest of the board carried the cultivated blandness of men and women who imagine they are the adults in the room. Let's be clear, Tessa began without ceremony. My brother is attempting a hostile takeover of the company our father built. Incorrect, I said, setting folders by each placard. I'm protecting the only part of it you didn't notice was load-bearing. Vincent cleared his throat. The board has not authorized property sales. Tessa asked you to sell them to buyers who somehow, miraculously, line up with permit applications filed by Atelier, her private LLC. I said. While serving as president, she pursued a competing brand targeting the same markets. intending to buy distressed assets after kneecapping them. That's a lie, Tessa snapped, color rising. Exhibits A through H, I said, sliding copies of filings, investor decks, and emails that used words like leverage where honest people use steel. Dad picked up a page, hand shaking, and read until his mouth went thin. Is this true? He asked without looking up. Her silence admitted what her face tried to deny. Northbridge's offer is above market, I continued, voice low. It includes employee retention, guest-facing continuity, and an operations plan that fixes what your consultant broke without gutting the brand's soul. You've planned this for years, Tessa said, voice tight. Buying the land, waiting to spring it. I bought the land because I love this business. You fired me because you love yourself, I said, and it surprised me that I could say it without anger. Dad closed his eyes. Vincent asked for a vote. It wasn't close. They accepted Northbridge's offer unanimously, with one abstention. Dad, who sat very still and looked like a man watching the ocean he loved swallow a boat he built. Tessa stood, chair legs rasping, and left without a word. Vincent touched my arm after. We'll be requesting her resignation tomorrow. We'll need interim leadership. It won't be me, I said. I'm going back underground. Underground. Dirt and deeds, I said. He smiled despite himself. A year later, I stood on the rooftop terrace of what used to be Harbor West. Northbridge had renamed it the Tide and Lantern, an inside joke I liked, and left the lobby murals and the banister scars alone. The same sun slung a rope of light across the bay. The same gulls heckled the docks. Inside, Luis still argued with boilers like they were family. Julian joined me with a one-page report. Up 17%, he said. Guest scores climbing. Staff turnover down. You were right about those windows on 3 and the breakfast hours on weekdays. People like to eat when they're hungry, I said. Radical stuff. He grinned. Your father. Dinner once a month. He tells stories. The grandchildren hog the dessert. And your sister? I looked at the harbor. Atelier filed for bankruptcy last month, I said quietly. Investors got tired of renderings and no groundbreakings. Turns out you can't pay contractors with thought leadership. I'm sorry, Julian said, and he meant it. Success without gloating is a discipline. It's weather, I said. She'll either learn or move to sunnier maps. We watched boats stripe the water. After he left, I stayed with the wind and the smell of salt and new paint. My phone buzzed. Dad, dinner? Kids want clam strips. I texted back a thumbs up and a heart because at some point you can stop making things complicated. Before I turned toward the stairs, I touched the parapet and thanked it for holding stone, mortar, and the invisible math of load. Tessa never understood that being president doesn't make a building stand. Foundations do. Sometimes those foundations are literal. Sometimes they are people. If you're expecting fireworks, you've never watched a well-run hotel change hands. It's not drum rolls and speeches. It's night managers comparing notes by the employee entrance. It's an email about the new 401k followed by a hot breakfast ordered by a GM who knows you don't buy Goodwill with coupons. It's a linen vendor paid on 30 days instead of 59. It's the dishwasher fixed instead of propped with folded coasters and optimism. Revenge wasn't a mic drop. It was continuity. It was the housekeeper's schedule posted 2 weeks out so no one has to scramble for childcare. It was Luis telling me he finally got the gasket he'd been begging for replaced without arguing through 3 layers of consultant speak. It was front desk staff laughing like the laugh wasn't costing them something. It was Dad eating pie with my niece, who asked whether boats sleep. They don't. And whether hotels dream. They do. They dream of not leaking. I didn't want my name on a plaque. I wanted towels without bleach stains and water heaters that didn't die during weddings. That's not triumph you can photograph, but it's the kind that lets you put your head down at night and not rehearse conversations with people who don't listen. A few months after the transition, an email found me from Nadia, Northbridge's HRVP. We're rewriting our non-compete and conflict of interest policy. Would you review? I hear you're allergic to loopholes. I sent back a red-line document that would make a consultant cry and a kid in housekeeping safer. She replied with a simple line. Thank you. This will outlive us. Dad and I took the kids to the boardwalk that weekend. He won them plastic swords with rigged claw machines, and I pretended to be slain. On the walk back to the car, he stopped, looked at me like a man seeing a landmark he's driven past 1,000 times and never named. I failed you, he said. You missed things. I corrected. There's a difference. Are we all right? We're family, I said. We can be wrong and still be all right. He nodded and wiped his eyes like wind had done it. I haven't seen Tessa in months. She sent a letter once, 3 paragraphs that sounded like a speechwriter held hostage by guilt. I didn't reply. Some conversations need time heavier than paper. I did, however, send her kids birthday gifts and told my niece to show me her science project on FaceTime. The parts of the family worth keeping are non-transferable and not subject to board approval. The best stories end quietly. They exit on soft feet and let you keep what matters. Mine ends on a Tuesday morning with a contractor in a neon vest waving at me across a street I no longer patrol and me waving back because muscle memory is just love that won't stop helping. It ends with me at a county clerk's office helping an old woman file a deed transfer because her son moved to Arizona and these forms are a bramble. It ends in the back stairwell of the Tide and Lantern where Luis and I eat leftover staff lasagna from paper bowls and rank boilers by temperament like baseball cards. If you want a headline, take this one. Foundations beat titles. If you want a rule, take this. Read the land, read the leases, read the room. And when someone who loves you tells you to buy the ground under your life, listen. Tessa said I didn't have what it takes to run a business. She was right if the business is selfies and sizzle. But the work, the quiet, stubborn work of keeping people sheltered and water hot and promises honored, that I can run with the lights off and one hand tied. They took my title. I kept the ground. And when the renewals came due, I made sure the people who make beds and carry trays and fix leaks had somewhere solid to stand. That's not the kind of revenge that trends. It's the kind that lasts.